There's a lot we can do with stroke methods to customize the behavior of our brush. We've already looked at stabilized stroke, which drags a line behind our stroke, which serves to smooth out any jitter that our hand would naturally have. But let's start at the top of the list and see all the different things we can do. The default stroke method is called space with a low spacing of 10%. If we adjust this higher to around 150, and then make a stroke, we'll see what's actually happening with the brush. So along the stroke, Blender is applying a single instance of brush strength. And whenever that percentage is low, it looks like a smooth stroke. If we right click, reset to default at 10%, that looks like a smooth stroke. But when we increase it, we get kind of a rivet-like pattern, which can be really useful if we implement our bolt brush texture. And now we can get an evenly spaced path of these bolts. Now let's get rid of that texture, move on to the next stroke, which is the dots stroke method. Now at first glance, this might look similar to the space stroke method until we start sculpting really fast. All right, the faster our stroke, we start to see the dots spread out. And because of this, it feels a little bit messy in my opinion. So I don't use the dots method. Next, we have drag dot, which you might be able to guess if we click and then drag, we're moving that single instance of the stroke along the surface. And this, once again, could be very useful for the bolt texture. Click and drag a bolt, move it along the surface where we want it to be placed. Next, we have airbrush, which is very similar to the dots method in my experience. We'll get rid of the texture for this. The biggest difference seems to be that as we hold the stroke in the same place, it will build up strength in that area, just like an airbrush does. And though I do find this useful when texture painting, I don't find a lot of use for sculpting. So with normal strokes, it's pretty stuttered, and we can see that dot pattern, which is not particularly useful in my experience. What else do we have? The anchored method. This is another click and drag type of a single instance. So we click and drag and it makes the strength of our stroke along with the size more or less. And so once again, this is most useful in my experience with a texture. So clicking and drag the size and strength of a bolt or the brick texture. In addition to size and strength, we can also adjust the rotation. So this can be useful for like clicking and dragging in a pattern to kind of align the bricks to the surface. And this is actually a very common method for applying textures in a controlled way. What else do we have in terms of stroke methods? We have line. Okay, going back to the bolt texture. If we click and drag on our surface, we get a dotted straight line. And when we let go, it applies the stroke according to that line. So that's obviously useful for a bolt. And if we layer on the randomization of the texture, all our bolts will be oriented slightly differently. Similar to the line method is the curve. So we switch to a curve stroke and I can start creating the curve by holding Control, right-clicking. That will create a first Bezier point, and then we continue holding Control, right-clicking, and dragging to create a curve, and then when you hit Enter, it will apply our stroke to that curve. Now the curve sort of exists as its own thing. You can see as we rotate around the viewport, it stays where it is relative to the viewport, not relative to the object. And we can come in and edit it like an object, clicking any of the Bezier points with left mouse click, G to move around, S to scale, or any of the curve handles as well. So it's a comprehensive Bezier system. We can select everything to remove it with the A hotkey, hit it twice, X to remove, and again, that's Control right click to start adding new curve points. Now there are some other settings to be aware of. Let's jump back to the default space stroke method. And there's dash ratio and dash length. I rarely change these, but they control how those dashes are laid down relative to your stroke. Jitter, however, I will use that on occasion. So if we increase the jitter strength, it essentially randomizes the position of our stroke. All right, so the space is way too high. Let's go down to the default 10. Also remove the bolt texture. Let's try that again. All right, you can see how it kind of randomizes away from the origin of our stroke, and this can be quite useful. Not something I use every day, but certainly has its use case. And that's about it for a broad overview of stroke methods.